so let's go ahead and get started. We only have one agenda item this evening. It's the FY22 preliminary budget discussion. So I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Javier and Kathy to get us started.
Thank you. So we, obviously it's not a small item. It's a fairly substantial one. But we have a handful of things that we wanted to discuss today. Obviously, you know that we're, we'll have the preliminary budget, not the preliminary budget, my proposed budget next Tuesday. And so we're trying to get everything squared away in advance of that. So we have a handful of things that we wanted to talk about today. One is, and they're mainly strategy discussions. So one is the projected use of the fund balance. So how we can, how do we want to approach it? And so we want to have a conversation about that. I want to do an update on federal funding, and how we are, thinking of using that federal funding as we look at this coming year's budget. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about the capital, the debt service budget. Anna and I don't know if Emily is with us. I know, so Emily and Anna were both at the meeting with the city council counterparts a week ago, and that was a significant item of discussion. So I think it was, we thought it would be helpful to come to the finance committee and, sort of share the perspective on that. And then, we're doing some additional digging on to have a better understanding of what we can expect on the debt service side. And so to sort of talk about that with you guys today. So that's kind of what we have for the agenda.
Great.
So let's start with, and I think I'd left this out, which is just talking about our baseline budget. Sort of, it's different from what you last saw. So, Kathy, do you want to go through that? Are you having trouble getting it to?
I'm sorry, I am. Let me just move this.
Greg, can you make me co-host too?
Absolutely.
Maybe I can get it.
I think I can.
Do you want me to share?
I just need to move this.
Too many.
I think I've almost got it. I'm right here. Share. Oops. I don't want to do that quite yet. I want to go back to the beginning. I'm so sorry. There we go. And share. Share and share. Hopefully you're seeing it.
We are. Yep.
Okay.
So, do you want to walk through the baseline without investments?
Would you like me to do that? Yes.
Oh,
Okay. So currently, this is how we look as of 3/9. We have a personnel budget that went up 2.3 million, which is mostly the COLA adjustments, bargaining contract agreements, those types of things. All those adjustments are built into that. That's for personnel. Our non-salary which has, and the non-S&B budget, which is our non-salary budget, actually does include some stipends and differentials, but that actually went down from last year. So we had 23 million compared to 23 million. This year we're down 394,000. Our debt service, however, went up 1.1 million. So overall, we're up 2.5% or 3 million on our expenditure budget. So that would result in a property tax figure of 98 million, which would result in a 3.26% increase in our school tax rate. And that includes an $85 million city valuation increase.
So I think you've seen this iterate over the past few meetings, and so this is where we are on the eve.
On the 9th. And I don't believe it's that different from what we have recently presented, but I don't believe that was to the Finance Committee.
Yeah, I think it was 3.4 was the most recent version that Anna and Emily saw.
So it's gone down a little bit. I think we did have an increase in our non-salary and benefit budget, but have since reduced that.
Yeah. So I guess any questions about that? So this is, just to be clear, the sort of the
baseline.
We're considering the baseline. There are, and we will talk about them later, some things that we've taken out of the baseline, and when we talk about the federal funding picture, we'll discuss those. So, but that's how we got ourselves to this point where we are at, the current budget. Questions or comments?
I don't see any hands raised. I just had one question for the city evaluation. So I think I read in the paper that they are going forward with the reassessment this year that they had put off last year. So the projected valuation, is that something you arrive at by getting that directly from the city?
Yes, we did, and we haven't heard that that's changed any. But that was a little while ago.
Yeah,
and that will change. That amount will change when the reassessment, but that reassessment will not kick in until after the budget is well underway. And then I'm not 100% sure when it kicks in, and there's an appeal process and everything else. So to make a long story short, it will not affect us this year.
Okay.
Yeah. And ultimately, and I think you all know this, but I'll repeat it anyway for whoever might be watching, is that the amount of dollars that are needed will not be different as a result of the assessment. So the tax rate could be, the tax rate could be lower if the assessment value, the valuation goes up as a result of the reassessment, but that won't mean that we get more than 98,442,359. It'll just be spread out differently in terms of how much each of us pays towards that 98 million.
Right. And I do see Emily has her hand raised now. So Emily, go ahead. Oh, you're muted. Emily.
Just on that, I think the one important thing to note is that after revaluation, the people who are more equipped to pay, it should be more fair, right? So the people who are more in a position to pay can, and so it helps redistribute the impact according to people's ability to pay. So I do think that is an important outcome from this process. in addition to the problem of it being so hugely off from the state valuation.
Anybody else? I saw Roberto put something in the chat. He was just wondering if there's anything else on this screen that has the potential to significantly change through the process.
So that's actually our next slide,
Okay.
which is dealing with the
Fund balance.
Fund balance.
Okay, let's go ahead to that.
Okay. So these were our fund balances as of 6/30/2020. So our audit just ended, and these are our final numbers. And the assigned fund balance is actually still sitting there as it was assigned to FY21. This was the budgeted use of fund balance that we projected for FY21, and those numbers are still in there. They're bolded. And the sum of the bolded is the 829,933 that you'll see right here. And we reduced it by 60,000 because there was a one-time food service equipment anticipated expenditure in the figure for FY21, and we removed that for FY22. But that's the only change that we've made to fund balance. So you can see this is just what would be assigned, and these numbers we're going to discuss this evening to see if those would change. So these assigned are budgeted use of fund balance, and the larger numbers are our actual unassigned fund balance numbers.
What is that total, Kathy?
We don't typically total them because we don't look at them in total. But the general fund, the 4.2 million is what's available in our fund balance to use and assign to reduce the tax rate, if that's what we choose to do. We typically would not do that in 1 year, but that's our reserve. And then we have a reserve for adult ed. We have a reserve for food service. This adult ed enrichment gets added to the regular adult ed, these two pieces. And you can see for these other funds, there's really not that much money available. So generally, it looks like we have a committed fund balance of $3 million for capital improvements, for a capital improvement reserve there. And then we do have a restricted fund balance for our CTE program, because that is required that we set aside the carryover funds and not use those for anything else as part of our fund balance. So we're going to be really talking about this 4.2 million that is unassigned.
I see Emily has her hand up.
Kathy, can you remind us a little bit about assigned versus unassigned fund balances?
Well, yes. So I'm going to see if I can get an official definition here. So there's assigned, restricted, and committed. And the restricted fund balance includes amounts that can be spent only for the specific purposes stipulated by Constitution, external resource providers, or through enabling legislation. And that is where we have categorized the CTE money. And then the committed fund balance classifications include amounts that can only be used for the specific purposes determined by a formal action of the government's highest level of decision-making authority, which I'd have to talk to the city about exactly how that would work. But the committed fund balances are something that are like for capital improvements. The money could only be used for the purpose intended. And then anything that isn't committed or restricted is unassigned. And then assigned is anything that is not restricted or committed would be assigned. And that's what we have here. That's assigned is a budgeted use of fund balance is considered assigned as opposed to restricted or committed. And then unassigned is what's available for use. It has to be used for education, but other than that, it's not designated for any specific purpose.
And what is the maximum amount that we are allowed to have in unassigned fund balance?
So that may be our next screen here. Let's see. So what did I do with that screen? Sorry. No, I don't have it. So 3% of our previous year's general fund balance, our general operating budget, is all we're allowed to accumulate in our unassigned fund balance.
I think you're looking for slide 4, Kathy. It's called projected use of fund balance for FY. Yeah.
No, that wasn't exactly what I was looking for. I thought I had another more a working document, but this is kind of jumping a little bit ahead. But we had 829 assigned for use of fund balance for FY21, and this is what we currently have proposed. It's just what's currently in the budget for FY22. And we have 1.3 million that represents a 3% excess over our budget. And maybe I can show you. Let me see if I have that here. I do. Let me move that. I don't know. When I move these screens around, I'm not sure. Can you see that?
Okay.
Okay. So the previous year's general fund operating budget was 113 million, and 3% of that is what we're allowed in our general fund unassigned fund balance. And you can see that we actually have 4.2 million from the other slide plus 500,000 that we currently have as assigned for reduction of property tax, but it's all available. 4.7 is available. We need to determine how much we would like to use for that, and we can plug those numbers in here. But this is 3% is the 3.4 million, and the total that we have unallocated right now is 4.7. So we really are have an amount in excess of 3% would be 1.3 million, and we need to do something with that, which is what we were going to discuss today, whether we use that to apply it against property taxes or put it into a type of reserve. We have a few options.
And so I think that's to Roberto's question about what could change in that first slide. Before we do that, though, back on the previous slide with the fund balances, I wanted to ask if there are what are the possible ways in which you can use the fund balance? What kind of assigned fund balances can you have?
Well, typically you might have one for capital improvements. You can reserve, which we do. We have a reserve for capital improvements, capital equipment. There's allowable for certain like emergency purposes, whatever we feel we would like to set aside some money for in the event of either an emergency or just to have as a committed reserve, but it would need to be for a specific purpose. It would be designated for that, and we would not be able to use it for anything other than what we specify it's for.
And to create those reserves, that's where you talked about the highest governance level needing to make.
Yeah, the council, I believe, yes. with recommendation from the school. So yes, we could put money aside to pay debt. There are a number of options as to what we could do with that.
Yeah.
And I would do some more research on that if we had some recommendations to make sure.
Okay, so go on then to the next slide that I brought us back from.
That's okay. So the next slide, the next slide kind of transitions into what we have available for federal funding. Do you want to go to that discussion yet?
No, I meant the one that we were looking at, the projected use of fund balance.
There we go. Okay.
It's back on the PowerPoint.
Is that where you want to be?
I want to be on the slide that says projected use of fund balance.
Okay.
Okay, can you walk us through this?
So this is showing where we were at FY21, how much we had assigned for budgeted use of fund balance of $829,333 for FY22 on the baseline budget projection that we just showed you, the first model. We had reduced it by the $60,000 less the one-time investment for food service equipment, and it's now sitting at $769,333. If we use our 3% excess, which was the $1.3 million for the general fund, and then keep a assignment for budget of fund balance for adult ed and food service and the adult ed enrichment piece, this fund balance is what we had last year with the exclusion of the $60,000. If we used all of that in fund balance to offset the property tax revenue, it would, it's 1.5 million. The impact's 10 cents, and we would go from a tax rate impact of 6.31% to 5.46. It's not significant. I think it's like 12 cents or so for every million that we increase. And here the increase is the difference between the 700 and the 1.5 million. So it's like an 8. It's not quite 12 cents. It's a little less because it's about $800,000 difference, which would be about a 10 cent reduction in the school's tax rate. That's if we used all of it. We can reserve some of the 1.3 million here for capital improvements, debt service, or we can use it to try to reduce the tax rate for the school side.
I have a question on the tax rate figures at the bottom, the from and to. Why is that different from the 3.24 that was?
Because that shouldn't have been on there, because that's what we're working to present on Tuesday. So.
I'm sorry. Yep. 3.26. Yeah. I didn't work it off of that one. Sorry.
Okay. Got it. No, I just wanted to I thought that might be the case, but I wasn't sure. And so is it, okay, so it would be a small...
The big idea...
It would still reduce it by 10 cents.
Right. So it would be a small reduction to the tax rate increase. And if we used it in other ways, would that have an impact on the tax rate?
No.
Okay.
It would give us less to work with. We wouldn't have...
I have like two strategy questions that I wanted to discuss with the board today. One is, should we look to increase back on, this slide, to increase the use of fund balance to max out what we currently have. And so to basically have that be 1.5 or 1.6, whatever it is, and reduce our total property tax need this year because we're using our fund balance. So I think that's one. And then I have a separate one. So I would like, to sort of at least tee it up with the board today that we have the option to potentially use that money this way. And then I want to talk a little bit about more down the road strategy conversation using the federal funding. So,
okay.
So I guess, does that make sense as a question? Do you know what I'm asking? And if so, what are your thoughts? And if not, what can I do to help you understand the question?
So does it make sense as a strategy in terms of, so you've said that you want to talk about one option is to reduce the tax rate. And then there's another option that you haven't really talked about yet.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But because it doesn't affect this year's budget.
Okay. Emily has her hand raised. I'll just go to her to see what she has. Emily?
Thank you. I guess my concern is more looking towards the future. Like this year, for the next couple of years, we're going to have federal COVID money, and that takes, it doesn't deal with the fundamental structural problem in our budget, but it enables us to put some Band-Aids on the issues. Again, I know we're not relieving the underlying problem with our high valuation and relatively low low income in Portland. In any case, so I'm wondering if we want to not use the overage this year and have it available in future years when we might face, unless we're able to change the funding formula, perhaps revaluation will help us a little bit. But in the long run, in terms of then creating an appetite for increasing local taxes on people who can pay, who have the ability to pay, but perhaps this money was better spent in years when we don't have federal funds to help put Band-Aids on our budget, and we bank it for the future.
And typically that is the guidance that I would recommend, but we have a number of factors that we can consider here too. Right now, the 1.3 million, we are over our allotment. We need to reduce that by 3. We need to reduce that overage so that we are only 3% over our 2021 general fund operating budget.
Which is the reason, I think my the second sort of strategy issue that I wanted to talk about is the one that you raised, Emily, which is sort of in the out years, but I don't think that is, the choice for this year is to either use it in our, to reduce property tax, the property tax increase in this year, or to create some form of a reserve, which is the, sort of the conversation that we were just having, right? About what are the possible reserves and things like that. But,
yeah.
We have to do something with, $700,000 that we just have too much in our current fund balance.
So we can allocate some of that for this purpose to reduce the property tax burden, or we can reserve it for another purpose.
And one of those purposes could be for debt service. Was that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
And that, just to the conversation that we had with the city, I would say that, that was raised. Brendan, the finance director for the city, kind of threw that out there. It's like, oh, that's one option. And I would say one takeaway that I had from that meeting was that there was concern raised about debt service being added in the long run, year over year, because of the school renovation projects. So I think that's, just sort of some context to understand, why that might be a feasible option.
Viable, yeah.
Viable, yeah. Thank you. Roberto?
Thank you. Can I, before I get to my original question, can I just ask about that what you just mentioned, Anna, on what Brandon mentioned there on the debt service? What I'm just trying to understand in what context that was mentioned, because we've known that this was going to roll into this budget. So did you say that there was some concern about the debt service showing up? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Increasing, yeah.
But how was that? Because this is not neither a surprise or new. Like we've known. Actually, we were fortunate last year that it didn't come into our budget. So just want to know what level of concern was expressed.
The folks on the city side are still grappling with the fact that we decided to renovate our school buildings after so many years.
Okay. Yeah, because like I said, like we knew that this was going to roll in. This, like, it's literally on time, right? Like we anticipated it. I guess my question about the decision to use the funds to ease the tax portion does it make, I guess my question is, and I'm not entirely sure how to word it, but assuming that the valuation will continue to increase, is this year the opportunity to make a bigger impact in it, given that amount will not increase? But so I guess what I'm saying is would our reason to use it this year not allocated for a fund, would it be because we can put a big dent on it this year, compared to the valuation? I'm not sure if I asked that correctly.
Try again, because
the effect that this would have by allocating it this year, it's we can quantify that because we know what the valuation would be. But if the valuation increases next year, and then we try to do something to impact the effect that it would have in our budget, we'd be taking on a bigger challenge because the valuation would continue to increase. So the 3 years that are taken up to assess our allocations would be greater. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, strategically, is this kind of like just present itself as a good window to time-wise to try to lower that the tax rate, or is it just one of the options that we have?
It's one of the options that we have. The other option is to create a reserve of some kind. I guess I really want to pause on the reserve piece, because when we talked about that with the city on Friday, they enumerated two things that you could do with it. One is to create a capital reserve, like the one that we have with over $3 million in it, and the other one is a special ed reserve. So I want to make sure that we can create, what I hear Kathy saying is that there's more flexibility to it than that. And so I feel differently about creating a reserve that can be used to pay our debt service increases than I do about creating another capital reserve that just sits there with a bunch of money that is then, sort of subject to, others making decisions of, we're going to pull some out of your capital reserve instead of bonding for it, as opposed to having it be used in a way that actually makes our budget work for us.
And that's the research I would like to do with the city to fully understand what the implications are of doing that.
That's right.
Roberto, did you have more?
No, I think I think I know where. Yeah, I think I understand the ask from the superintendent better.
Yeah. Emily?
I just had a clarification, which is the capital reserve that we do have now that, I'm sorry, I don't see the slide now, but that's restricted, I believe, the 3 million. I understand that the city is the decision maker on that, but could the city allocate that money to pay allocate that money for our debt service?
I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know. That's part of what I need. I'm not even sure what that is, if that number is still relevant.
It would be really good to know if that 3 million at some point in the next few years, as we are addressing, seeing the debt from the school renovations, if it could be used. And sorry for my interruption.
No, that's fine. I fully intend to have more information on that well before next year, like within the next few weeks, so that, we can make some decisions around it. We've just been working on the other aspects of the budget, and I haven't had a chance to do that. Plus, we're kind of finishing up the audit with the city as well. And they haven't had time to respond.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was thinking the same thing. Because the reason for the cap on fund balance conceptually, I think, is because, as a government entity, we're not supposed to be,
stockpiling, reserving, right? Yeah.
So, getting our money into these sort of restricted funds that just sit there and sit there and sit there kind of goes against that philosophy. So I don't know. I don't know how much the city knows about it. It's there, or, but it would be good to have a conversation with them about, like, what can we do with these funds? Because
yes, and that's exactly what I intend to do, sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So I think that's one question, and then the other one is, what are the other types of committed funds that we can create, and what is the mechanism for creating them?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Emily and Roberto, you both still have your hands raised. I'm not sure if you have more or if that's by accident.
Sorry, lowering.
Okay. I feel like I was just going to say something. I can't remember.
So then the second part of this conversation, the second sort of strategy discussion is, and I think it's what Emily started to articulate, right? That we have a significant amount of federal funding, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we're envisioning using the federal funding that we currently have in hand to make one-time investments. Some are things that came off of our baseline, so that we could start our baseline at this level that you saw, right? But we have a significant amount of those federal funds, and so one potential strategy is to use our federal funds to pay for approved general fund expenses, to the, obviously to the extent allowable within, the what is the money supposed to be used for and things along those lines. But in order to be able to build up reserves that could then be set aside for reserve for assigned fund balance purposes, that in the out years would allow us to be able to keep our budget from, suddenly exploding for lack of federal funds and, requiring significant, significant tax increases. So that's, I think, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is that we have the potential to do that. And it is predicated on a couple of things. One, not using those funds to reduce the expectations in any given year, but to rather reassign costs that are approved in general fund to those federal funds in order to purposely create a larger reserve that we can then make into assigned fund balances. As opposed to the other way, which it could be used, which is plausible. For example, for the city to say, like, well, you've got all of this federal funding, so instead of having a 3.26 tax rate increase or a 5.5% tax increase, why don't you have a minus 3% tax increase? Use all of your federal funding to reduce the expectations on local taxpayers.
So it would kind of be like almost like setting up an endowment kind of that would operate kind of like our own fund balance, but it wouldn't have all the restrictions that our legal fund balance has.
I mean, we'd have to, this is, I think, tied to the previous conversation, we still would have to create some assigned balances. But for example, if we could create a fund balance, an assigned fund balance that was devoted to paying for our debt service in the future, we would prevent seeing those increases in our budget, and instead they would be paid for out of the assigned fund balance.
Right.
So right now we have unassigned fund balance. We can allocate a portion of that to offset the budget. And we also have the option of reserving part of that in a separate account for a specific purpose that needs to go through the approval process. We don't have to use the whole 1.3, and we don't think that we're really going to use the budgeted use of fund balance that we projected for this current year that we're in. We probably won't need that, so that there's also maybe some increases at the end of FY21 that are going to go back into that fund balance. It's going to keep growing, at least for this year.
And that's sort of what I don't want to call it inspired, but made me consider this a potential way for us to look forward, because I think our experience this year with a large influx of federal funding is that we've been able to have some savings in some things that we didn't do, but also reassign some costs to federal funds that are legitimate reassignments, and therefore what we projected we would use out of fund balance, we won't use. There's a likelihood that we will come in under budget for this year, which will again build onto our fund balance. And so that's where I'm thinking, that's what played out this year. That's what's likely to play out in the out years. And so for us to think strategically about how do we use that with the knowledge that that's likely to happen, so that then it can be carried over into years where the federal funding is no longer usable, because the federal funding that we're having is usable for FY22 and FY23, but not for FY24. And so in FY24, we would find ourselves in a place where we would need to either, make the reductions associated with the, whatever we've been paying for out of federal funds, or, increase taxes to make up that difference.
Mm-hmm. Emily, and then Adam.
To me, this seems like pretty clear cut that if we are going to be responsible in planning for the future, that we should carry over this money rather than use it this year to reduce the tax rate. So this is, to me, about kind of sustainability and responsibility for the future, and I would want to see it carried over.
Adam?
So again, predicated on it being.
There are specific purposes that we can reserve the money. So that's capital projects and debt, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of debt rolling onto our budget over the next few years.
We will.
Yeah.
So as long as we can confirm that, I 100% agree.
Yep.
And
Adam?
part of.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Adam's next.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to say something.
No, I'm waiting. Sorry, I interrupted.
That's okay. Appreciate the conversation. I'm struggling a little bit. I think I understand the spirit of the conversation, but without having those questions that were just identified, that level of information, is hard for me to inform my full opinion. And then I'm curious, if part of what I'm hearing is that there could be another fund balance that's created, and sounds like the debt piece is an easy place to look to, and I would just wonder if other things that are priorities, like the LAO plan, of creating, a fund for that would be accessible in future years, would be a benefit, or if that's just not, if it's better to deal with the predictability of the debt funding through a fund balance like this, and then allow the flexibility to address our other priorities around equity through the rest of our budget.
And I think that's the thinking, again, there's research that we need to do to figure out, could you set up, that's more in the spirit of an endowment for a certain purpose, which, is what Anna was, suggesting. But I think to the extent that that's where we feel like we need to do some additional work to understand what types of committed or, assigned fund balances are permissible under law, so that we can, but in essence, what we're proposing to do would be to use the, use federal funding for as long as we have it, so that we can then build up those general revenue reserves that would allow us to, to pay for things that, are in our budget, whether it's the LAO plan or whether it's, debt service, in such a way that then, we can do the other one without raising taxes, beyond what is acceptable.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like the opportunity for long-term thinking and planning. I appreciate that that's a part of the opportunity that we have here. And again, without knowing the rest of the sum total of both this year's picture as well as some of the things we're talking about for the future, I'll remain in listening mode and intake mode to try to get my thoughts together.
What I do know today is just that we can establish a reserve fund, and that can be used for capital improvement. You can establish a capital improvement account, a capital equipment account, a credit reserve account, which is kind of for emergencies, and I'd need to know a little bit more about that, and sinking fund account, which is to pay for any long-term debt. And that's where the debt piece would be. And then tonight, we do need to decide how much we want to allocate for if we want to keep the $763,000 that's there from fund balance allocated for property tax offset. How much, if we want to increase that, and then the difference, we can determine whether we want to put that into a reserve account.
I'm sorry to differ, but I don't know that we need to make that decision today.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, that's just part of the discussion.
That's my budget presentation, and then the school board can decide otherwise. So I don't feel. I mean, I'd love to. That's why we put it on the table to just get some insights from you. I think I have that at this point. I don't want you to vote on anything at this point because it's not your budget yet. It's mine.
Okay. I apologize. Yeah, I just don't have enough information to really everyone to make a informed decision or form an opinion.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of, I agree with this, sort of future focused strategy. I think it's interesting. We always talk about the multi-year budget and we have conversations with the city about how things are going to look, far down the road. But in practice, we've never, and I don't know that it's necessarily the nature of school boards or municipal entities to really plan that far ahead, because we're subject I mean, we ultimately have very little control over our own bottom line. But I think in this circumstance where, we have so much federal funding, it makes sense to plan out as far ahead as we possibly can to make the best use of those dollars. And then my other thought is just from a strategic standpoint in our discussions with the city in asking for an increase this year, I think that they will appreciate the sentiment of planning for that debt, that oncoming debt expense. It's clear to me that the differing perspectives that engaged in debate at the time of the bond are still there. and that's something that we're going to hear from the city side, whether we agree with it or not. And so to the extent that we have some leeway to mitigate that a little bit, I think could be helpful to us in being able to ask for an increase this year, with a caveat that, we do have a plan for the future. So those are just some thoughts that come to mind from this conversation.
And I do think, your point about we normally have very little control over it is absolutely true. And I still think, this is, as you said, a unique opportunity. And so I think we're looking at, a plan that covers 4 years. It doesn't cover 10. It doesn't cover, all of eternity, but it looks at, how can you parse out the next 4 years, in a way that is sort of recognizing the infusion of resources and trying to leverage them, for as long as we can. That's really, that's all you can do. It's not beyond that. Kathy, can you go to the debt service pages since we're on that topic, and then we'll come back to federal funding. So we still have work to do, but we're trying to get a handle on our debt service schedule. And so this is where, when you looked at that first slide that has our total budget, and you see the amount of 9.555 million in debt service. That's what that other slide is showing. So this is how we get to that 9.55. I think, it's, and I've asked Kathy to work with the city to get a handle on, when do some of these projects that are here, when do they end? So, for example, there's the Ocean Avenue local portion is somewhere in there, and it's separate from the state portion of the bond. When do those come to an end? When does something that's labeled as school tenure, when does that come to an end? We know, for example, that the pension obligation bond, which is at the bottom and is a very substantial part of this, is coming to an end at a predictable time, I believe in FY25 or FY26. So, for us to get a better handle on what and conversely, we have stuff that's coming onto this, right? That's the $1 million that we added this year, and, the $1 million that we'll add every year for the next 10 years. And, then it'll level off and start to come down. So, for us to get a better understanding of what this debt service schedule looks like, so that we can actually start planning against this, knowing what's coming in, what's coming on, what's coming off, and so on. We don't have much insight into this, this schedule. We have a 1-year schedule. We don't have a 10-year schedule, or, a historical schedule of what was on and then, what rolled off, or how much smaller is the Ocean Avenue, debt service becoming every year, and how much of this are we getting from the state, and how much are we, getting from local property taxes. So there's a significant amount of work that we need to do to really understand this debt service at a deeper level than we do right now.
Emily has her hand raised.
Can I just repeat what I believe I heard you say, Mr. Superintendent, which is that this isn't all on our. This is some of this is paid by the state. Like the numbers for East End, Ocean, and Hall don't make sense to me. But you're saying some of that is perhaps paid by the state, but we just don't have the details.
I'm sure that some of that is paid for by the state. I mean, I wasn't here when the Ocean Avenue and East End projects were, but I was here at the very, end of the Hall project. And, there was a small local bond, to the tune of $1 million or something along those lines. And then there's the 20-some million dollars in the state projects. And so just looking at this without, knowing factually that this is true, I would suspect that the major capital that sums to 1.8 million is the state portion, and that the one that sums to 102,000 is the district portion of that. So presumably we're getting from the state $1.8 million in our EPS funding that is, that is going towards the Hall debt service. And just because of the way that I see these grouped, I would venture that, and because of the size of them, that the same is true for East End and Ocean, that those top ones are the ones that we're getting the state funding for, and that the bottom ones are the ones that were locally approved. So the referendum that the district did for the Hall, now Row school projects was somewhere in the neighborhood, I want to say, of $1 million. And you guys probably remember, some of you remember that better than I do. So
that's my understanding of the schedule. Yes. Yeah. Local only means it's not state approved.
Emily, did you have a follow-up to that?
No, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Adam?
Just clarifying question where it says Hall and then parenthetical Talbot, that should be Row. It's just a mistake. Yeah, okay, thanks.
I don't see any other hands on this.
Okay. Kathy, do we have anything else on capital? I think just like the next slide that just basically shows it's the what you see on the first slide, right? Which is
yes, yeah.
And we need to do more of a historical look just so that we get an understanding of how that has changed over time. Okay, so let's talk about the federal funds and the strategy for that. So you go to the budget for federal funds. It's slide 7 in my deck, but I realized that after I made the changes to it, you went and, you worked on a different one. So I'm looking at my deck. It's the one that's labeled Impact Beyond FY21.
Do you want to share that, or I don't?
Well,
I don't have.
I can share my screen if you stop sharing. Can you see that? So you've seen this before. This is where we currently stand with our federal funding, right? So this is the 2 ESSERs that we've received. The first one was $2.8 million. About 1.3 million of that went to pay for custodians. This year, that left us with about 650,000 that we are now intending to use to pay for custodians. That same set of custodial costs again in FY22, and the second ESSER is almost $8 million. We would need, and we've already discussed this with you before. Our intent would be to tap that for another 650 to cover the costs of custodians for this year, and an additional 1.3 million next year to pay for custodians into FY23. So that basically leaves us with $6 million in federal funding that needs to be used between FY22 and FY23. And so because we know that as of today, the president signed the new relief package, and so we expect that we will receive another substantial amount of federal funding. That what we intend to do, and so this will be part of what we present on Tuesday, is to fully spend these dollars next year to support a number of one-time expenses that we would otherwise have to put into the budget. So those include things like significant IT costs that we are looking to incur, some additional, we would pay for the whatever the referendum on the minimum, Jesus Christ, the
Hazard pay? Is it?
No, well, the hazard pay. The hazard pay would be something that we would move to federal funding, again, an allowable expenditure that we would not carry over into our general fund, as well as our summer school in its entirety. So we would, not only pay for additional services that we intend to provide this summer, but also move, and that's where you see some of the decreases in that first slide, where we've moved certain costs, like the cost of the summer school that we normally carry in our budget. We've moved that onto federal funding for this year. So what I wanted to do was just, excuse me, share with you the way that we're thinking about using this current allocation of federal funds. And then the subsequent allocation of federal funds, that's where, back to our strategy discussion about trying to use that in the future in a similar way to offset some existing expenses that will be in our budget, and then allow us to build up reserves that we could use towards future years.
So this 5.9, which theoretically we could spend over the course of a couple years, we can expect that you'll be presenting to put it all in FY22.
Yeah, except it won't show up in our FY22 budget. What it basically will do is it allows us to reduce some expenses that otherwise would have been in our budget. So, for example, summer school, $130,000, $140,000 that is currently in our budget is not going to be in our budget, because we are going to pay. We're going to spend more like $2.2 million out of this federal funding on summer school and extended learning opportunities, and so that would be that would come out of this. The hazard pay won't be in our budget because it will be in the federal funding allocation. The substitutes, we estimated a cost of $300,000 for having the in-school substitutes that we had this year going into subsequent years. And so that would be also in federal funding. And, we are looking to, we've removed from our local budget the cost of the interest and associated costs with central office in this FY22 for the purpose of putting our building on up for sale, and being able to not have those costs going forward. So what we're trying to do is put all of the things that are one-time expenses that we might otherwise have had to increase our budget for, if they're allowable federal costs, to use our federal funding to pay for those. And then to do the same in subsequent years, but not to subtract that from the budget upfront, so that we can instead build up our reserves so that we can use those in the out years after the funding runs out. And I know, like, Kathy and I have not had a chance to talk through sort of how to visually how to visually make this accessible. So I just as I find myself, talking through this, I can imagine what the slides look like that would allow you to see this, but we've not had a chance to do that. So,
and I think I know the answer to this, but just to be clear, though all of those things that you just talked about are not currently contained in the rollover budget that we just looked at in the first slide.
That's correct.
Okay.
Some of those would have been in the budget.
Right, they would have been added.
The property, the interest in principal on the Cumberland Avenue property would have been in that budget. So that budget would have been, $250,000 higher as a result of that. So that was removed. We removed the cost of the summer school that we traditionally carry in the budget, somewhere to the tune of $140,000, because we intend to have a bigger summer school effort, probably for a couple of years, and have that be funded out of the federal funds that we have.
Yep. Any other questions or thoughts at this point? I don't see any other hands raised right now. Did you have more, or at the end of it? So I think this is all very helpful information to kind of lay some context for what we can expect on Tuesday. And hopefully you've gotten from us what, guidance or workshopping you were looking for.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see, Adam, you have a last thought?
Yes. Just could we please update the budget information on our website? It currently has for last year fiscal year's budget process.
Grace is working on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Also, if we could put today's presentation in board docs, if it hasn't already been added, that would be great.
And maybe we can just run down what our next couple of dates are for meetings. Obviously, we have the budget presentation on Tuesday. And then are we meeting on Thursday next week? Okay.
Yeah.
And
also,
then we'll be...
Sorry. Would it be possible to review the dates that we're meeting with our colleagues on the city side? Because I know when we talked about it last Friday, that meeting was not in my schedule. So I just want to make sure that we have those dates, clarity on those dates as well.
Kathy, do you have those dates?
I can get them.
And Grace, your hand is up. I'm assuming, is it about this?
Yeah.
Yes. So what we're going to do is that we're going to have a banner on the website on FY22 budget development that will link to a Google Doc document that has all of the meetings, where it starts with a calendar of all the dates of the meetings. And then for every meeting date, we are going to put all the documents that were used in that meeting, including the video recording of that meeting. So it's in one place.
Great. That's great. I think we did that last year, and that worked out well in the end, because by the time we get towards the end of the budget process, this is a very document intensive committee. So I appreciate that work.
Yeah.
Do you have the calendar, Kathy?
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so Tuesday, budget presentation. Thursday, we meet. And then Monday is our public hearing. And then the 25th is our first joint finance committee meeting.
And just flagging that meeting is not in our shared calendar.
Okay.
And I don't know, I think those are typically at 5:30, is that right?
Good question.
And then
we need to get that. And yeah, so.
And then April 8th, we do have a meeting in our calendar as a finance committee, but it looks like it's a joint finance, which is fine, as long as I think we have a placeholder. It suffices for my purposes.
Yeah. If we need to, like after the joint finance committee meetings, we could always meet as a committee. Yeah, so maybe we might want to kind of plan on that with a placeholder for the 8th, because our next one will be our vote to recommend the budget. So if anything crazy happens and we want to meet as a committee, we might do it right after that joint finance committee meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll make sure everybody gets those dates and that all the stuff gets updated. All right. Well, I think that's everything. No last comments. I guess I can call for a motion to adjourn. Oh, Emily.
I appreciate the thinking outside the box here. We're in, a situation we haven't necessarily been in before, and I appreciate our ability to think about ways of doing things that aren't just how we've always done things. So I know it creates more work. And that Tuesday is right around the corner. So just appreciate the effort, all the effort that's going into this. Extra effort, I should say.
I agree.
Thank you.
Okay, then I would call for a motion for adjournment by Adam, seconded by Roberto. All those in favor? It's unanimous, and we're adjourned at 7:22.